Hello and welcome to this special webcast on our 2025 Irish CEO Survey. My name is David McGee. I'm the ESG Leader for PwC Ireland and a partner with PwC's Strategy and Practice. I'm delighted you can join us today as we look at the results of our 28th Annual Barometer of Business Leader Sentiment. This year, almost 5,000 global CEOs responded to our survey, giving us a rich and fascinating set of insights to consider. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest panel, including Áine McCleary, Chief Customer Officer at Bank of Ireland, Ronan Fitzpatrick, the Chief Information Officer with VHI Group, and Darren O'Neill, Consulting Partner in PwC Ireland. And you too can join the discussion by using the Q&A function on your screen. Please post your questions there and we'll try our best to respond to them as we go. But first, let's take a quick look at the high-level findings in this year's survey. First off, and not surprisingly, geopolitical conflicts and macroeconomic volatility are major worries. 88% of Irish CEOs are concerned about their impacts on operations and 93% feel exposed to economic fluctuations. Also, 87% are anxious about the rapid pace of technological change. But there is a silver lining. Despite these challenges, optimism is on the rise. 74% of Irish CEOs expect economic growth to improve in the next year, up from 50% last year. Even more impressive, 93% are confident about their company's short-term revenue growth prospects. All of this points to the need for business model reinvention. 29% of Irish CEOs believe their company won't be viable in 10 years without change. 3 in 10 believe their company won't be viable in 10 years without change. This highlights the urgent need for Irish businesses to rethink their strategies and reinvent their businesses to stay competitive. On a slightly more positive note, many CEOs plan to integrate AI into their processes within the next 3 years, with early productivity gains already being claimed. Plus, investments in climate-friendly initiatives are starting to pay off, with some CEOs reporting increased revenue. That's a quick snapshot of the survey. For a deeper dive and to see how the findings can benefit your business, please do reach out to your usual PwC contact. They'd be happy to share more. Now, here to discuss some of these issues in more detail, I'm delighted to be joined by our panel of experts. The survey tells us that CEOs recognise the need to reinvent their business models. Today, we talk to the people at the coalface of that reinvention. I'd like to welcome Áine McCleary, who's Chief Customer Officer for Bank of Ireland, delivering a customer-first strategy and culture across all parts of the Bank of Ireland Group. She's a member of the bank's Group Executive Committee and is a non-executive director of both the Bank of Ireland Mortgage Board and Bank of Ireland UK plc, and a past president of the Institute of Banking. Ronan Fitzpatrick is the Chief Information Officer with VHI Group and has over 30 years of experience in both commercial and business roles. Ronan has extensive expertise in transformation, including defining new target operating models for a digital age, establishing new ways of working, IT delivery and business problem solving. Darren O'Neill is a consulting partner at PwC Ireland and leads the firm's insurance team. Darren has extensive experience working in both industry and professional services, leading the design and implementation of complex business change and analytics programs for clients across sectors. Over the next 30 or 40 minutes, we'll hear their insights and experiences on these topics. And just one last reminder, you can post your own questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen and we'll do our best to get to them. So let me dive right in, and Ronan, I might go to you first. With what results, as you looked over the survey, what caught your attention and what do they mean for business leaders?
Thanks, David. I suppose the first thing that I was happy with was that the optimism that came through in the report, right? So probably naturally optimistic myself, but delighted to see that that's shining through after coming through COVID and everything else. There's another 2 things, if you don't mind, that surprised me when I looked at it. One was 50% expect Gen AI to boost productivity, yet I also kind of saw later on that almost an equivalent percentage number expect to grow their workforce. And I think that's an area that we might look at later on, because right now I feel the business case or the value drivers for AI have been quite reductive, in that if it isn't about FTE saving or manual hours saved, it's still quite reductive. Now, it may speak to the breadth of the CEO surveyed in the responses. The other thing that surprised me, and you called it out there in the intro, was 87% wary of the pace of change. That's a big number, but I'm actually more intrigued by the 13 who aren't wary of the pace of change, because I think we've never seen anything like it, and it will probably never be as slow again, in fact. So they're the kind of 2 things that as I read through it, that stuck out with me.
There are some good themes to pick out, and we'll come back to them over the course of the conversation. Áine, Chief Customer Officer, Bank of Ireland, across multiple businesses of the bank. How do you make sure that they remain agile and responsive to market change and that volatility that Ronan touched on?
Yeah, I think one of the key pieces is that strategic foresight. So it's looking ahead and looking to anticipate the changes that may be needed. But then there's a number of enablers I suppose any business needs to have. The digital change, transformation, data, and also around people and culture. If I give an example, with all the strategic foresight, if we take when COVID happened as an essential service, we need to move from having 2 physical contact centres to having people working from home. Servicing our customers. So data and digital technology allowed us to make that change at pace. So I think that's how that key enabler. And then the other piece that allowed us to do that at pace was very much our culture and our people. So, that's up to myself and the other members of the leadership team to embed that culture of challenging the status quo, constant change, adaptability, flexibility across all of the colleagues within the group. So I think there's a couple of core enablers there. The strategic foresight can help you to anticipate, but you need to be able to move at pace when things that you can't necessarily anticipate happen as well.
Yeah, and that fast pace that both you and Ronan have picked out on. Darren, talk to me about that, because the CEO, so the 87%, 13% split that Ronan talked about, there's a number in there that 29% of Irish CEOs and 42% of global CEOs feel in the long term their business model just isn't sustainable, that there's something fundamentally needs to change. Talk to me about that.
It's a really interesting number, and we spoke about this earlier on. I mean, that number has been increasing every year, and I think it reflects the broader number in the survey, which is 87%, are kind of aware, concerned about the pace of change. And Áine touched on that as well, about the balancing agility to react quickly, but also being strategic and thinking more long term. I think what's kind of additionally interesting for me on that number is the 29% of Irish CEOs versus the 42% of more global CEOs. Undoubtedly there are phenomenal changes coming into many legacy industries, many existing industries. What I'm interested in is that Irish CEOs are maybe less concerned about the change of their business model down the road. And 3 in 10 is a relatively big number. And I'm kind of asking myself, why might that be? And I guess, look, logically, we're such an open economy. We are so subject to change around the globe that influences how we behave within that context. And again, I kind of picking up on Áine's point, we have to be dynamic and agile in what we're doing. And I suspect kind of Irish CEOs have kind of factored that into their thinking already. But look, and again, we'll pick up on some of this, certainly in the sector that I work in the insurance sector. I see remarkable change coming down the line. And I fundamentally believe that some of these organisations will be fundamentally different in 5-10 years' time from now.
And Ronan, I want to go to you, because if I take the thread that's running through the first 3 answers there from all of you, like Áine talked about having to be able to do stuff quickly and at pace, and in COVID being able to quickly kind of defederate out a contact centre. Darren talked about a much longer time horizon and how do you react, and you talked about the level of change. How does a company get kind of bench ready and have the bench strength to be able to kind of cope with that level of change?
Look, I think only touching it from a culture perspective, I mean, you have to have that culture of some bravery and a willingness to try new things. I mean, one of our values in VHI is the courage to create a new future, and it's a real one. It wasn't something that we just picked from somebody else's value set. It's funny, Bank of Ireland's around a long time, VHI are around a long time. You can have that classic incumbents dilemma. We've done this a particular way and we've been very successful doing it. So you have to have that strategic foresight and the courage and the curiosity to look at doing things differently. Do we get it right all the time? Absolutely not, right? But unless you have people who are curious, we have been brave in the past. We went from being the only provider of health insurance to providing health and wellbeing services. So that took a bit of bravery, moving from just payer to payer provider. And I think if you're around since 1957, people might naturally think that you're not changing how you do business or changing how you do things, but we have to change, and it's reflected in the CEO survey. Our CEO is very adamant on it. We need to change to continue to be relevant and continue to connect with our customers. And for us, as we look across that journey from health insurance to patient, there's a huge responsibility in us to be able to join up that value chain for you. So it isn't just about having 2 separate businesses. Where it's really powerful is if it's just you as our member, and we can join up from interest in a policy to delivery of care. That's where it becomes powerful. So that change of a business model, the change of the ecosystem within which you operate, that's hugely powerful.
Your answer is really interesting because knowing your career has all been in tech, and yet you talked about culture, you talked about people, you talked about how it feels like for the customer. It's a different mindset than, I need to plug in the right software to be ready for that. And maybe I'll come to you on that, Áine, right? Because you're dealing with all those customer issues as well. But emerging tech, AI came out as a strong theme, cyber came out as a big concern. Emerging tech and digital transformation do have a role in shaping it. It's not all about the culture and the softer stuff. How do those technologies help you to deliver on your goals?
Yeah, I think there's some very similar themes coming across here. So I think, they're not new, but we've spoken about pace. I may not remember personally experiencing it, but I do remember when the first ATM was in Ireland, and that was 1980. And I think we called them pass machines, if you recall. And then we had our first laser card in 1996. So like 16 years between them, fast forward to online banking, digital, your banking in your pocket, your wallet, your cards, your contactless payments. So it's that pace thing that we need to look at. And then it's a case of, to get from A to B, and I think picking up on your point earlier, Ronan, we look at some of these digital technologies as enablers of efficiency, but they actually allow us also to do things we haven't done before, to go into new places. And I think, also picking up on the point earlier that Darren made around change, I think there's a certain amount of change that is in all of our DNAs now. We all have some element of a change muscle to have survived to where we are. And now it's how people define change and how people define transformation. And I think that can be maybe some parts of how, when I read the survey results, I maybe explained some of the differences. But if I use some examples, in our contact centres, using large language models to allow us to do conversational IVR, which helps both the customer but also helps in overall efficiencies and a bank perspective. If I look at some of our online forms, using machine learning, using that with our chatbots to get better answers, better responses, reduce the cart abandonment and that. So it's really about looking at all of the technologies we have to make it easier for our colleagues, but also easier for our customers on a daily and a weekly basis. Yeah,
spot on. And I love that idea of it's not just the efficiencies. Ronan, you picked up on that earlier. It's also about how do I find new stuff. And when we go out and talk to CEOs, they're looking for new revenue opportunities and productivity gains, not just the back office efficiency. And that idea of change, because Darren, you picked up on that up front about why the Irish results are more optimistic and positive. That kind of changes in our DNA, that quote from Áine. Talk to me about cross-industry in your own sector, but more broadly, what are you seeing when you go out with clients around that pace of technological change?
So I am fascinated by this because, we're probably all a similar vintage on the panel here. So we've seen this remarkable evolution of technology and this acceleration of the pace of change over the last 30 years. Like it has truly been remarkable, the fourth revolution and all of that. But if you listen into what Áine and Ronan are saying, they're not talking about the technology for the sake of the technology. They're talking about how they improve, how they engage with their customers. And that, first of all, when we are out talking to our clients, that's very much central to what they're doing. And then if I come back to, so how are organizations leveraging this pace of change and really leaning into some of the new technologies that are coming out there? It's incredibly difficult if you're a legacy organization and you're trying to unwind legacy processes, behaviors, cultures, looking at building new skills. You've got an operating model that's positioned in a certain way. That's very hard, and innovating around that is something that organizations are continuously trying to engage with. I think in terms of setting out, getting that right balance between consumers, I think what's been interesting is that consumers have really demanded, because you're placing a lot of power into their hands, that you need to change and evolve your offerings to be in line with them. I think that's really important. And then if I look back, it's kind of a general point on technology. I think technology was quite rigid 15, 20 years ago. You had to come in with a very clear set of requirements around, this is what I want to be built, and this is how it gets deployed. I think because technology is now far more agile, I think you've got to constantly be working with the technologies and understanding how you deploy it. And that demands that you're constantly evolving your workforce in terms of how they engage with that technology. So, there's a lot on there. When you're trying to balance across that, like the key point for me is it's all about how we're using the technologies to drive better services, products, offerings, engagement with our customers, and that's important. And then it's around how are you continuing to build your workforce to allow you to do that, or your sourcing model that sits around that. It's very difficult I think it's very, very difficult for organizations, but at the same time it presents a very interesting opportunity.
But again, we keep coming back to that comment about talent and people and having the right people and the right, however you source it, right? And it's interesting because we've got all this push on AI and digitization, and yet we're all of you are saying getting the right talent in the organization is still critical. I just want to have one quick follow-up to that piece about the consumers are demanding more and that pace of change. That's hard for a large incumbent, right? So however agile the software has become, change management and discipline is still hard in a large organisation. How are you seeing clients cope with that and adapt to that?
Yeah, and I mean, might come at this from kind of two kind of points of view. I mean, the first one is what I'm seeing is that industries, because of the technology, this is the point earlier on, technology was a rigid enabler. Technology is more of a kind of it accelerates your ability to innovate today, okay? And what I'm seeing across certain sectors is a convergence of multiple sectors. Again, because the idea is that you want to bring the best of what you can to your consumers. So the consumer's need and the consumer's demand is now often being met by a number of sectors coming together, converging around an end-to-end product. Like Ronan talked about, VHI is a good example, and health insurance as a sector is a very good example of this. Moving from being a traditional insurer or a payer into a payer-provider model. So you've got a healthcare sector and you've got an insurance, a financial services sector coming very closely together to provide a seamless engagement or experience for the customers. And we see that the mobility sector is another example of that. Like the mobility sector is unrecognizable from what it was 10, 15 years ago, where you've got energy is a part of that, you've got utility, you've got technology, you've got the automotive part of it as well. These are all coming together to ultimately provide the same service to the consumers. Now, so what does that mean in the context then of workforce and change? Well, again, I go back to the technology is an interesting enabler, and bringing these different sectors together to best position and integrate the technology for the consumers' benefit is important. At the organizational level, in order to do that, your workforce and particularly your leadership need to be really clear on, are we bringing the best product and or service to our organization, and how are we focusing on our role and our strategic capabilities within this end-to-end ecosystem. So I think organizations need to continually push to move away from we can be all things in order across our value chain to deliver to consumers, and really understand where are we going to strategically differentiate ourselves and lean into that particular area and really look to build the skills and capabilities within that. And again, really easy words to say in a sentence on a panel, very difficult to actually execute against that. And
interestingly, we've a couple of questions in from the audience, and one of them touches on that, and I want to come back to that because the particular question that caught my eye is one around executive leadership teams. I'll come back to that, but for anyone else who wants to send in any questions, feel free to use the Q&A on your screen. I just want to come to this is all very optimistic and positive, and look at all we can do if we have the right time. There's a darker side to all this change and pace of it. Áine, can I, in the last couple of weeks, Bank of Ireland made annual results announcements, but one of the things that caught my eye in there was a €50 million investment in fraud protection, right? Can you maybe just elaborate on that and why the bank is making such a strong strategic commitment around that?
So that 50 million, just to give you a sense of what is involved there, there's some obviously tech deliveries in there, but it's also in relation to customer service and also societal awareness in relation to fraud. And I suppose that investment is important just from a Bank of Ireland perspective, but it's much wider than that. The research that we have done shows that in 2024, 100 million was the cost to Ireland in relation to fraud. And actually I saw a stat the other day, which was in the UK market, and it was that 100 million sterling was lost last year on romance fraud alone. So I think, it's the scale. Another interesting piece, over the Christmas period, usually a quieter period, and we had over 10,000 calls into our contact centre where people wanted to speak to people in relation to fraud. So the fraudsters don't necessarily take the same holidays that we do. But I suppose, very much behind it is around our awareness campaign for its Stop, Think, Check. because what fraudsters do actually leverage is that people are very busy, and we've spoken about pace and change and agility. So when you get in that text, you get in that message, you might be likely just to action it quickly because of the pace of busyness in your wider life. So we're asking people just to stop, to think and to check. So that's kind of the piece around awareness. But I suppose what's behind this is a need, I think, for a number of different, and it's back to your point, a number of different sectors and industries to come together and government to try and actually reduce the growth of fraud. And if I take what we have put forward in that regard, we submitted to government a 4-point plan in September last year, in Q4 last year. One of it was around SMS scam filters, introducing them, a national financial crime strategy, a shared database, and to your ecosystem point, across payments, financial services, and also to include utilities, also that awareness campaign that I mentioned as well. So 3 of the 4 are in the programme for government, which is great to see. But I suppose it's an example of industry coming together for the betterment of consumers, I believe, overall. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, so if we take, Ronan, if we go to you, because Áine's covered the consumer piece of the risks of all this positivity, right? And just at the corporate level, and how do you respond? Because, and I'm going to throw a load of acronyms at you, like EU AI Act, CSRD, DORA, NIS2, right? Let's not worry about what the acronyms specifically mean this morning, but it's A, very hard for an organisation to keep on top of all its obligations, and B, actually meeting them, and meeting the spirit of them as well as the letter of them. I don't want you to talk specifically about your own organisation, but just broadly how to...
Yeah, and look, and you could probably keep throwing, there's probably 3 or 4 other 3-letter, 4-letter acronyms in there that we could lob in. Look, I think it's an important part of, again, back to the culture and how the board and how the exec team look at some of these things. Because if you've been around, like we have since 1957, not all of your systems are going to start off in a compliant state.
Yeah.
And Darren touched on this with kind of some of the new entrant piece and how the market might look. So there is quite a burden there. And, there's a curve. I don't know if you've seen it before. It's a pace of change, but it's technology. This won't work on anyone who's listening, right? There's a technology one. The individual is next. Then there's business, and the last part of the curve and pace of change is policy and regulation. We saw that with the EU AI Act. It was in draft, and then ChatGPT happened.
Yeah.
So back before the policy is even signed in, it's changing, and that's a challenge for all of us, right? So there's no doubt we've had quite a bit of work, if I speak about us, we've had quite a bit of work to do to get ourselves set up for some of these things. And I feel sometimes it's hard on teams as you're trying to, 1, encourage pace of change, but 2, ensure you're wholly compliant or aligned with the obligations that you have in that space. So you're kind of squeezing at both ends. But there's also no doubt that it's made us better.
Yeah.
Right. So it's forced us to do some things. And I use forced advisedly. It's not that we didn't always want to do them, but finding the time, we've had to automate more, we've had to get better at how we do some of those things. So I think that we will come out the other side of some of those regs definitely better than we went in. It's still a very difficult threat environment out there, and balancing that pace of change again is a huge part of it. But I think we can do it, and that's probably the optimist in me as well. As we look at the survey, we need to find a way that actually we can bring those curves closer together, because even for PwC, I see it like it's a tricky proposition, but that pace of change, expect your classic response to an RFP would have been citations. Some of them might be from a few years back. They don't work anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like we were drafting a bill of material for a piece of technology, and in the time it took us to draft it had changed. So how we all keep up with that pace is a tricky proposition. But it's a great time to be involved in anything tech or anything related.
I do want to open up the discussion to AI, but there's some really interesting questions coming in from the panel, or from the audience, sorry, and I just want to take a couple of those first. And you all either serve on executive teams or advise executive teams. So this one intrigues me. So with all that pace of change that we're all talking about, how do you keep executive team mental models and how they see the world updated? Somebody mentioned strategic foresight. But do you see executive teams doing scenario planning or wargaming, or have there particular tools to try to deal with that volume of change that's coming at them? Áine, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. So I think I maybe go through a few different dimensions to this. So firstly, I think there's a piece around constantly, if we take the customer, knowing what the customer wants and what they need. So as an executive team, we would regularly have, focus groups, dinners, engagements, and we've over 500,000 pieces of research that we have from customers that we circulate, listening to calls, so to keep very much on that. Then I suppose there's some of the pieces touching off what Darren was saying around, the old way of doing things and the newer way. And I think it's asking all of us as leaders to move away from having functional remits to having that enterprise mindset.
Yeah.
So effectively, I think you're going to see a blending of some of the roles in that regard to being able to think, digitally in everything, and to be able to be thinking customer in everything, and to be able to thinking about your colleagues and everything, because they're all fundamental enablers of everything that we do. But then, I suppose there's that external, constantly staying up to date with external, and it's hard at the moment, external macro and geopolitical changes, but thinking about it not in terms of only what does it mean for us as an organisation, but what does it mean for the customers we serve, and what do we need to do to agilely be able to change in our propositions, in our, for example, in our, with climate being a huge area of focus, looking to our mortgage, our home loans, to say, well, how do we bring in a BER element to that, coming out with our EcoSaver mortgage. So it's constantly looking and listening, but listening with intent to what's happening out there.
I might add to that. I think Áine's spot on. I think that listening with intent to what out there is a really important part of the executive's remit. I think that, and some of our clients refer to it as the kind of the outside in. I think, look, we're a small economy, relatively speaking, with a small consumer base, and while yes, many organisations provide services internationally, many of our big retail organisations are providing them into our market. And it's probably not unreasonable to say that our market probably lags behind other more advanced markets, whether you look east or west on that. And again, it's not to shamelessly copy what's been done in other jurisdictions, because you have the nuance of how consumers engage with us, how we behave, what we're like culturally, and all that sort of stuff. But I do think it's incumbent upon our executives and our leaders to be thinking beyond the kind of the immediate strategic horizon of maybe 2 to 3 years, and to looking at 5, 10 years on. And I think that's incredibly challenging for executives. In the same way, a politician gets 4 years to fundamentally change the health service. That's a very difficult thing to ask anybody to do. But organisations, particularly large, systemically important organisations in this country, they have to be looking, and I fundamentally believe they are, because I see the strategic change cycles that they look at. They need to be looking at what's resonating with consumers in the US, what are the recent trends around some of the fraud prevention and mitigation, what are they doing across ecosystem in Asia that are actually coupling products and services. And this all goes back to the point around our business is going to look fundamentally different, say 4 out of 10 executives in 5 and 10 years' time. And it's then about how do you get another thing into a very busy executive agenda when you're trying to manage all the regulatory challenges, when you're trying to provide services to consumers, when you're trying to transform your organisation, when you're trying to rebuild your technology capability. And I'm looking at Áine and Ronan, it's very difficult to get the balance, but I think that's a critically important thing to be doing, that horizon scanning, looking out there.
Yeah, I might jump in on that a little bit, right? There's that old saying, the measure of a man is someone who plants a tree that they won't enjoy the shade of, right? And we recently signed off on a chronic disease management program, and it's a real example of that, looking in the longer term, because if you looked at chronic disease management in short term, then it makes no sense, right? But we know from our data, and we all know we're living longer, right? But it's no good living longer if they're not healthy years. And care delivery has been episodic, and Darren kindly said it can be really seamless. Like, it has the potential to be seamless, but we've a lot of work to do, all of us, right, in that whole wider connected ecosystem. But if you look at, you touched on helping contact centre agents and others, if we use our data better, and we previously would have taught in silos, right? Claims data is there to pay a claim, but we might see indicators in your claims data of a health issue that you're not even aware of.
Yeah,
that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So joining up that data for the value of our members, we want our members to live longer, stronger, healthier lives, and we really, really believe that.
Yeah.
But you can't do that unless you join up the data, and you can't do that unless you get agreement that you can join up that data for specific purposes. So if we can free our agents to deal with those really tough calls that they deal with, to say somebody may have been diagnosed with a life-changing condition, and they haven't even spoken to their family yet, and they're speaking to one of our agents. We have to give them the tools and the capability to deal with that. And we have to join the data up on the longer term view, not for tomorrow, for the longer term view of the good of the population. And it has vast reaching benefits for the wider population.
Really, really interesting conversation. I want to go to another question from the audience that I know all of you will have views on. You all talked about the importance of talent and that gives you agility and knowledge and capability. Did the panel find any impediment with people working from home? If you're trying to keep an organisation agile, keep the pace of change up, be able to kind of drive teams in the right direction. Darren, I'm going to go to you first while these two kind of think about their answer.
Yeah, I can probably be more direct. I don't know, but I think, this is very topical, and I think we're moving from it to a space where I think organisations are probably stepping back a little bit and maybe mandating that people are coming in a bit more, but forgetting what the balance is. So we are human beings and we are social creatures and we learn from each other through, engagement. And I find, and again, this is kind of trite, and I know that, this has been well put out there before. The over-the-phone stuff is very, very transactional, and it loses an awful lot of the nuance. And I certainly know when I'm working with my clients on some of the knottier things that they're trying to do, whether it be re-platforming, maybe it might be architecting for the customer all the way across their value chain. It's very difficult to transactionally engage in stuff like that because there's so much nuance around the problem that you're trying to solve, and you need multiple different voices coming in to do that. So having a transactional conversation with one other person is absolutely fine, and having the space and time outside of the office to kind of lock yourself away to put some thinking, that's fantastic, and that world should continue to exist forever. But actually getting people together to problem solve in a very human kind of way, I think the benefits that are attached to that, it's very hard to quantify them, but for me, in terms of a way of working, it's absolutely incredibly important. And David, if I look to our own organisation, like we are a learning organisation. We have a model where we bring in smart, talented young people, and we need to educate them so they can perform to the best of their abilities around the products and services that we deliver. Educating people in a hybrid environment doesn't work optimally well. It can work to an extent because we can learn from books, etc., but learning from our peers and superiors in terms of the hierarchy and the experience that you have in the organisation is incredibly important. And we don't lick that up from the side of the road. That's how hospitals work. You go into a hospital as a young graduate to learn from the colleagues that are around you. I'm not comparing what we do now to work in the health centre, but it's the same principles. The nuance of bringing humans together to learn from each other, I think is absolutely critical.
I knew you'd have robust views on the topic. Áine, what's your views on that?
Yes, some of the things you've said resonate. Some I'd maybe have a slightly different view. I mean, we haven't mandated in terms of people coming into the office, and we have seen no impact on productivity from people being. In terms of engagement, and I think it came from the question around skill set and talent and development, and we've seen an increase in the number of colleagues who are engaging in our lifelong learning, and in particular we've pathways. But I suppose what was incumbent on us as leaders and as an organisation was to make it more digestible, to deliver it in a different way. We've just spoken about earlier on, like moving nearly from waterfall to agility and how we do tech change. Well, we do the same in terms of how we did bite-sized learnings, but also to allow people to expand their skill sets and to have different skill sets, because we're asking different things of them as we've moved over the last while in terms of our various focuses and the tools that we have. So I'd say we've seen, increased engagement. Our overall colleague engagement has increased. And we have seen, as I say, more people engaging in the lifelong learning, skills development. But I do agree with the point that if you're doing the likes of workshops, there's an energy you can get off the physicality of being in the room together. So there is that, be it a team huddle day, a team neighbourhood day, where everybody gets together and actually does that. And I think it means you have to plan more, because we've all heard the story of people coming into the office and sitting in a cubicle on Teams calls all day. So I think you have to actually make sure that you plan better for when you're asking people to come in, or when people are in the office, that time is used for the benefit for that face-to-face and where that actually really, really benefits. So I think there's no black and white.
For sure, Áine.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Just on a point of order, I'd like to call Darren to task because he suggested that PwC were a learning organisation, which almost suggested that we weren't, right? But look, but I'm a bigger man. I don't want to drag us all back into that. But I think we're a little bit more like Áine in that we haven't mandated a return to the office. I do think for noodling out a problem, getting people together is a huge part of it. It takes so much longer without doing that. And I think for continued investment, particularly in a junior workforce, it's very difficult. I'm officially old, right, so I still buy a Sunday newspaper. And my wife chastises me for it, but I kind of reference it as I might read something adjacent to what I started reading and find that I'm interested in it, rather than I went looking for that, which if it was online, I would have had to go looking for that specific topic. And I'd like to think I learn in the back of it before my newspapers are thrown out on a Tuesday. But it's a tough problem for us to solve because people have made lifestyle choices, and we can't be ignorant to that. So we have to find a way that balances the flexibility of working from home with being able to solve problems quickly and as quickly as we need to do it.
Great. There is loads more questions coming into the audience. I do want to make sure we don't close without some discussion of artificial intelligence and Gen AI and agentic AI and all. So the survey said that Irish CEOs are embracing it, right? Yeah, going for it. 44% said improved efficiency, 31% improved revenue in the last 12 months. Just Ronan, just to go to you again for a second, how are you seeing that impact? Are you seeing it starting to boost efficiency or provide innovation? Or
probably both of those things. So improving efficiency definitely, and it's a tricky part. That's why I mentioned early on that I think we've a bit of maturation to do on the business case and value drivers for AI, because I still think, as I said, I think it's still reductive. It's still down to, how many manual hours are you saving as well as everything else. But we've used it in areas such as claims processing and everything else. But it's also brought business and IT teams closer together, to your point, in changing the workflow model. I mean, you need business and IT teams to be working together for machine learning to work and for fuzzy matching to work, because it's going to grow. It's not going to be a one and done. Yeah. And that's a challenge again for organizations, because you can typically be project funded, which is more a one and done type scenario, but we need to work it through. But I think AI and the technology advances, one thing we have to be careful of, I think we're all good at learning new things. We are less good at unlearning the old ones.
Yeah.
So there's that classic Peter Drucker thing, there's nothing so useless as doing a great efficiency dash which shouldn't be done at all. Yeah. And if we're using AI to do things we shouldn't do at all, well then we've probably got a problem. Yeah. Right. But we've seen examples of, if you take us, we produce a policy document. Now, I don't know about you, but you might read an IKEA manual because you have to, but you don't consume data in that way. And if you go to a consultant, you're diagnosed with a condition, we don't want you to be flicking through your policy document, right? There's a better way to engage with it. And things like Gen AI and being able to deliver the information in a policy document in a way that suits the literacy needs of the Irish population, that's powerful. Yeah. Because again, it's of utility, it's for the benefit of our members, and it's for the benefit of our colleagues, because we won't be getting all the same calls in relation to, am I covered for a piece? Mm-hmm. So those things, you can have below the glass optimization of a process, above the line innovation and transformation, and you have to bring those two worlds closer together to get real value.
Yeah, really interesting. Darren, what are you seeing out there as companies grapple with trying to adopt AI? What would you recommend?
So maybe just picking up on one thing Ronan said, because I think there's a real skill in actually your organization, your people being able to identify and prioritize use cases for AI. Because the first thing is, don't let AI drive your agenda. Let your people, your products, your customers, your agents drive how you're deploying the AI. So that's kind of, again, pretty trite statement. I think everybody understands that. And I think a lot of the knowledge around how do you take and articulate the problem and then prioritize the value that can create internally or for your consumers, that is a skill and a capability on its own, and then applying the technology to it. I would say organizations are more still in the experimentation stage as opposed to the industrial scaling stage. And we certainly would look at it across three horizons. And horizon number one is very much around build awareness, build some competence in the technologies or understand how you're sourcing the capability, and that could be internal, it could be external, etc. But put some proof of concepts out there, try and demonstrate some value. Like, you're going to get limited to zero return on investment in any of that, but you're building muscle memory in the organization in a small group. That's not scalable. So then you kind of got to move into, now that we've got a little bit of an understanding, what is our strategy around this? And again, it is not a strategy for AI. It's a strategy, how are we improving our processes, our services, how we engage with our customers, and what is the role of AI within that? So again, it's subservient to what we're trying to do to the organizations. And then what capabilities do we need to build in order to scale that? So that's kind of your horizon number 2, continuing to do your proof of concepts underneath that. And then I think you've got to get to a tipping point which says, we're all in on this, we're all in on this at the expense of something. Is we are now prepared to invest further because we can see a clearer roadmap and we've got a clearer sight of how it generates value. And that for me is Horizon 3, which is now you're really starting to put investment with an expectation of a return on that investment against it.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. The only thing I'd add to that, because I think you've both covered it, is don't assume you need to educate your colleagues in relation to it. I think we sometimes forget that our colleagues are consumers themselves, and there's a likelihood that they are using it in their day-to-day life already. So I think it's more pervasive outside of our organisations and inside of our organisations than maybe.
Spot on. Really fascinating way to end, and a fascinating conversation. I'm loath to kind of pick out, but there was 3 themes that kind of we returned to a number of times. Number 1, talent, right? And you all talked about the importance of talent, despite all the digitisation and the AI. We talked about convergence in a number of ways. Like, Darren, you talked about the convergence of industries, and Áine talked about moving from functional to enterprise. And I think that's a theme that came out. And the final one was time horizons. Like, all of you referenced the challenge of dealing with today's issue, hitting today's revenue number, dealing with today's customer incident, and also trying to keep an eye on the 5-10 year horizon and the challenge that is for everybody. So I'd like to thank the panel of experts who explored the findings from the survey with us today. And I'd like to thank you, our viewers, for joining us this morning. We learned that Irish CEOs are readily embracing AI to boost efficiency and revenue, but they're also facing challenges with their business model reinvention and technology disruption. The discussion, the fascinating discussion, highlighted the importance of staying agile, leveraging digital transformation, and balancing innovation with strong cybersecurity measures. And we also touched on how emerging technologies are shaping new business models and the crucial role of investments in fraud prevention. I hope you are leaving today with talking points you can bring to the table in your own organisation and bring into the discussion with your colleagues. You can read the full report on our website at pwc.ie/CEO survey. At PwC, we work with businesses of all sizes and all sectors across Ireland to support them in designing and executing strategies that will transform their business and position them for sustained success into the future. We'd be delighted to speak with you if you'd like to know more about how we can support you on your business reinvention strategies. Thank you once again for your time today. Thanks again to the panellists, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.